Hi everybody, this is Rob with video 17 in the series which talks you through how to play the City of Stains, which is a game that I designed and which is available for play on Tabletop Simulator. As you could see from the opening screen, in this particular video, however, which was unplanned, uh, I'm going to go through some clarifications and mistakes. Having now looked at all of the videos that I've made in this series, I realized there are some aspects which were either underexplained or, quite frankly, were explained fairly poorly by me, or in certain cases where I simply made a mistake or left something out. So the point of this video, which will be the last one in the series, is to simply point out those clarifications. And the first clarification I want to make is how you win the game. Now, there's various methods. Any faction who gets to the requisite number of quarters control. So in this game, let's imagine that the Costa, the green faction, has got to the point where there are four quarters controlled. Because it's a three-player game, four is the requisite number for the win condition. In that event, on its turn, the Costa player must move a leader into the quarter in which the victory claim quarter action is situated, where that tile is situated, and to do so must then take the quarter basic action. That will mark the end point of the game. The player has achieved their victory. They have moved on to the victory claiming aspect, which takes place on this particular disc, which will be present in every game. And in that way, the game will come to an end instantly, regardless of where you are in the phases. Uh, but of course, this will only occur during the action phase because an action is required to move a leader onto the spot. And it's the same whether the victory condition is to achieve the necessary number of quarters or whether Costa has achieved its own personal victory condition. In this case, to have amass 80 coins. And if you look at the coins here, let's assume they have in fact done so, then regardless of the number of quarters controlled, they would likewise move one of their leaders onto the spot, take the quarter basic action, thereby win the game and bring it to an end immediately. And any faction can do so whether they achieve the requisite number of quarters or whether they complete their specific faction-specific victory condition. That's one way that the game ends. The other way, or other ways, are that the game proceeds to the last round, being the ninth round, the last ninth round being completed, or the last event card is drawn, indicating that game end has been triggered. In these situations, the round will continue to finality. In other words, you will go through all the phases. You'll have the action phase, you'll have the growth of influence, you'll have the income, then you will have the event phase, and cleanup won't be necessary, but only then will the game end, and only in that instance will you compare how many quarters each faction controls, and the faction with the most number of quarters controlled will be the winner of the game. But how is that determined? With regard to the Crown's ability to decide ties. So that brings me to another area of clarification, which I didn't properly explain in the previous videos, and which I want to clarify now. And that is, how do you determine whether a faction controls an individual quarter. And I'd like to explain it by way of the example that has been set up here in the North Catch district. You will see in a three-player game, three factions have influence in the area, and there are also a few remaining civilians. If you look at the stats, the Costa has 6 influence, and the guild also has 6 influence. But this is not a tie for control of the quarter, and I think it's important to stress that, because when the number of influence tokens are tied, then you have regard to the combined levels of the leaders in this particular faction. So the guild has 2 leaders, and the Costa has 1 leader. The guild's 2 leaders are, if you look down here at the guild's board, are level 2 and level 1. So they have a total of 3 levels worth of leaders. The Costa, on the other hand, has only 1 leader with a total level of level 2. So even though they are tied for influence, in fact, it is the guild that controls this quarter rather than the Costa. So in this case, there would be no need for the tie-breaking mechanism exercised by the Crown in order to determine who controlled this quarter. If the situation was different and the Costa had 1 more level 1 leader, then the number of levels would be tied as well as the influence, and in this case, the tie-breaking mechanism would be employed, and the Crown would decide, for political or other reasons, who in fact controlled the quarter. So it's important to stress that that tie-breaking mechanism will only take place if there is a tie in connection with the number of total levels that the 2 tied factions have of leaders in that quarter. Of course, if neither side has any leaders in that particular quarter, then the tiebreaker would be invoked immediately. So that's a second area that I really want to clarify. Another area that I need to clarify, which also deals with the tie-breaking mechanism, is the Royal Council. I explained how, as the game begins, the posture of government is in what we are known as council. And the effect of this is that at the start of the game, each faction places an influence token on the designated area within the council. In a game without the Crown, that will be the posture throughout the game, whereas the Crown, if they are in play, has the ability to adjust that posture more towards an autocratic and self-serving agenda. But when the game begins, what I didn't properly express was that there are a number of civilian tokens placed in the Royal Council in the center. And that is the same number as civilian tokens that are placed in every quarter at the start of the game. In other words, 7. But that number adjusts whenever any quarter has its number reduced, then the number of civilian tokens in the Royal Council adjusts to match that amount. So it always keeps track with the quarter in which there is the least civilian influence. So in this case, if hypothetically North Catch had only 3 civilians and every other quarter had 7, then the number of civilians in the quarter would adjust commensurately, and there would only be 3. Why is that important? Well, in order to win a vote in the Royal Council, whether that vote is to invoke a decree or potentially to allow the play of an advanced action without cost or requirement, one assumes that the civilians vote against that resolution or proposition. In other words, that the civilians represent a a negative vote together with any other negative votes. So at the very least, in order for an action to take place of this kind, you need a number of votes that exceeds the number of civilians, plus that exceeds any dissenters, any dissent by other factions in the game. It is only when ties originate in this situation that the Crown's ability to decide ties would come into effect. Let's say you had four, you being the Costa, imagine Costa had four votes in the council and the guild had one, and there were three civilians. If the Costa wished to play one of its cards, let's choose one, for example, one of its cards that can be invoked with, let's imagine the Costa wished to play bridge tax and it didn't have the requisite leader at the requisite level, or it didn't have the requisite amount of influence, and decided to go to the World Council. It would propose this card. It would cast its votes in favor, being four. The guild would also cast its vote against, and the remaining civilians would be against by definition. The net result would be a tie. In this instance, the Crown would determine whether or not the card could be played without the requirements being met, because the votes are tied. Only in the event of a tie, if there's a majority to play the card, then the card may be played. If, however, the majority were against it, then, as explained previously, the card must either be played face up, meeting its requirements and paying its costs, or face down as a basic action, but the card cannot be swapped out for another card. So those are really three major clarifications that I felt needed to be made. I hope they give you more clarity as to how to resolve these aspects of game end condition, of ties being settled, and of how the Royal Council works in the at the start of the game when the civilians are still a voting bloc in the council. Anyway, that, as I say, is the last in this series. I'm going to take a break from these videos now, and the next series will be as requested, and thank you for your requests, a specific series of 6 videos, each one dealing with individual factions and suggesting strategy and tactics when you play that particular faction. So look out for those videos. As for this series, thank you for watching. Thank you to all of you who have watched, and to those who have given me feedback. I really appreciate it. I look forward to perhaps playing the game with you on Tabletop Simulator in future. Thanks for watching. This is Rob saying goodbye.